Welcome to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. KC Cares is the intersection of the profit and the nonprofit community, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This KC Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. Last year, 2021, was a historic year in a number of ways. We continued to struggle with COVID-19 evolving pandemic. International hotspots heated up. We continued to grapple with racial justice issues and violence in our own country. The financial markets and economy remained fairly strong, but increasing prices in housing, food, and consumer goods started seeping in, while the unemployment rate remained fairly low and employers scrambled to get the best talent out there. So what happened with charitable giving? Nearly $485 billion was given to charitable causes and institutions. Yet while total giving grew by 4% between 2020 and 2021, giving actually remained flat overall when adjusted for that dirty word, inflation. Corporate giving had a nice increase. Individuals gave a little more, but giving by bequest decreased. These are just some of the findings in the Giving USA 2021, the annual report on philanthropy for the year. Hot off the presses, we have two experts to share some of the key findings and to tell us what they mean, where to go, and what the future looks like. We welcome to KC Cares Dr. Patrick Rooney, Professor of Economic and Philanthropic Studies at the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, and our own Dr. Philanthropy, Jeffrey Byrne of Byrne, Pulofsky and Associates. Let's dive in. We welcome you back. Okay, we've got new numbers, new everything. Patrick, let's start with you. Kind of give us that overall and who's given more. Then we'll talk to the problem spots.
Sure. Thanks, Ruth. So, I think there's some interesting patterns here. As you mentioned, total giving grew by 4% in nominal dollars, but when you adjust for inflation, it actually dropped by almost 1%. And so, I think this is a reflection of the fact that inflation, the dirty word that you mentioned, is causing some uncertainty in both the financial markets, but then that, ripples down into how we as individuals especially feel about what we can afford to give and when we can afford to give it and so on. And so I think, that the total effect is a little surprising, but part of it is driven by, a drop off in bequest giving of over 11% adjusted for inflation. And bequest giving, as we know historically, is very volatile. It goes up and down a lot based on who died that year, how wealthy they were, and how much left in their philanthropic will, so to speak. And I think that kind of volatility, especially in a year where other sources did not grow as much, had a bigger impact on the total than we might normally see.
I want to hit on bequest giving real quick here. You say sometimes it's a factor of who dies. That should be, that ebbs and flows. We understand that. But is this something to be concerned about? Are people changing and thinking, well, maybe I'm not going to bequest. Maybe I'm going to hold my money and make sure it goes to my kids or wherever.
So this is certainly something, we'll want to watch over the long term to see if this is a change. Because remember that the exemption for the estate tax rose dramatically under former President Trump's tax bill. And people respond to incentives. And one of the reasons for giving, not the main reason for giving, but one of the reasons for giving is the tax implication. And with now this very large increase in the exemption level, virtually nobody will pay an estate tax. And so now, except for the very wealthiest families, it's something like 0.0007% of all households, all estates will pay any estate taxes. And so, when you think about that, you think about, well, that tax-induced incentive to give through your estate is gone. And while people don't give because of taxes, one of the reasons I think that the estate tax mattered was because it was a different thing to say to your children or your grandkids, I'm going to give, to this charity to fulfill my pledges and so on, but also because of the estate tax. And I'm kind of, getting a twofer out of this, right? I'm giving them charities, I'm reducing my taxes. Now you're just giving to charity instead of your kids or your grandkids or whomever. And so I think that makes that a tougher family conversation. Now maybe you don't tell your kids anyways, you just do it. But surprise, but I think it makes that a tougher sell. And so it'll be interesting to see how that changes over time. But like I said before, there is a lot of volatility in charitable bequest giving historically. And, we can name in any given year, the wealthiest 1 to 5 households who die that year determine whether or not bequest giving goes up or goes down.
Well, I guess maybe a lesson for everybody is be kind to your parents. You never know.
We just had this conversation yesterday for Father's Day at my house.
That's true. That would have been a good time to have it. My kids, don't worry. Nada. Jeffrey, I know we don't have you for the whole episode, so I want to come back to you a minute. Patrick and I will dive more into numbers, but why is this kind of a report important here in Kansas City for the nonprofits and the donors?
Well, Ruth, this is my 16th year to be involved with Giving USA and to be presenting the report, not only in Kansas City, but across the world via ByrnePolofsky.com, our website. I think these are good numbers. They're not excellent numbers. I was a little bit surprised that giving didn't go up more than a nominal percent. But I think that this is important because I believe that all of our volunteers need to hear these numbers, and our colleagues in the nonprofit world need to hear these numbers. You walk into a boardroom, you talk to volunteers, and the first thing they say, Jeffrey or Dr. Rooney, go after those corporations for those gifts and those foundations. Well, while corporate giving went up nearly 24% last year, that was only 4% of all giving, or 4 cents of every dollar was given by corporations. We know corporations give self-interestedly, which they should, because they're there to benefit the shareholder or the owner. However, we know that giving by individuals, whether that be direct individual giving, that be through a bequest, as Dr. Rooney was mentioning, or through their foundations, of which half of all foundation giving is by individuals, nearly 86 cents of every dollar of the 484 billion was given by individuals. So you see the importance that individuals play in the overall giving to nonprofits in the United States.
Well, I like the fact that you brought up that, when you walk into a crowded room and you have to make that pitch and which way you're going to duck and dive and go, what would you advise said nonprofit, let's say, going into corporation A? How do they plan that based on the great work that Patrick and his team have done? And you can touch upon, we had corporate giving go up, but it's a small percentage. Individuals is kind of flat. And there were bumps and things elsewhere. Advice, Dr. Philanthropy.
Well, I believe that it's important that the donor know where philanthropy comes from. Now, Dr. Rooney might argue with me, and I won't get into the nuances of the argument, but we are the most generous people on the face of the earth, Americans, and we should celebrate that. And I believe Giving USA does celebrate that. We're not at $500 million yet, but we're nearly tipping over toward $500 million, or as I like to say, $1/2 trillion of giving by Americans, whether those be for nonprofits in the United States or around the world. I believe, however, in these times where we are today, you've got to acknowledge the precarious nature of this donor's situation. That, whether we have inflation over 8%, but unemployment below 2%, whether gas is at over $5. We've got to first recognize when we talk to a donor that we feel their pain, that we understand that the situation right now is not good for the average American, and that we've got to acknowledge that when we are talking to them so that we can be on a realistic level. Let's not be Pollyannish that while giving is good in the United States, the average family right now is paying more for their food, for their gas, and for their bills per inflation. Yes, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm sure Dr. Rooney can reflect much more in depth on giving in recessionary times, which I believe is important. But I do believe that acknowledging and having a dialogue about what the situation is for that individual or that corporation or that foundation is very important as you create that dialogue of seriousness, but you build your own credibility by doing that.
Dr. Rooney, I cannot wait until we see the report from 2022.
Me too.
It should be a very interesting take. As I was looking through all the materials, and I would encourage our viewers and our listeners to get a hold of the report and really take time to dive in. I think together you all have done an excellent job of, pulling out the McNuggets, as it were, in an easy to understand way. But it will be interesting. I was trying not to put the 2022 on the 2021, which is that a note to people as they disseminate this? And how do you weigh that, as Jeffrey said, as you go into the boardroom with an organization like his?
Yeah. So that's complicated, right? So we know, this report that came out, comes out every June. So the 2022 report is about giving in 2021. And, but we're also now, everyone's like, what's going to happen now? And so obviously inflation is a continuing theme and one that's been exacerbated. One footnote to Jeffrey's comment about Americans being the most generous in the world. I would say empirically that's absolutely true, and I would be the first one to say, without being an unabashed cheerleader, I'd be the first one to say that philanthropy is a core American value. I mean, we see this almost more. Well, let me put it this way: more people donate to charity in presidential election years than vote for president. That's a profound statement, and has held for the last, all the elections for which we have data. And one of the reasons I think that's important is because it shows, we know now how much politics matter, and that every vote matters, right? I mean, we've lived this experience in a very dramatic way, regardless of which side of the alley we're on. It's had an impact, right? And yet more Americans say, I'm going to try to influence the world for the better through my philanthropic giving than through the ballot box. And so I think that's important. My asterisk on that is that a lot of American giving is giving to mass mosque, synagogue, congregation, and that's important. And again, so faith is another core American value for many households, and that influences how much is given by individuals, certainly. The other thing is that in the United States, we have the second lowest tax rate of all OECD or kind of Western developed countries, except for Japan. And I think most Americans are surprised by that because we hear everyone whines about their taxes, of course. But we have relatively low taxes. And so therefore, we fund more public goods through private philanthropy. So medical research, education, health and human services, a lot of that is funded through voluntary giving as opposed to taxes, whereas in Europe and most of the rest of the world, it is funded through the government, through taxes, and then redistribution through government services. Now, I'm not saying which one is better. I'm just saying empirically there's a difference in it, in part an explanation for this differential in giving by the United States versus the rest of the world.
Jeffrey, I want to grab one more quick comment from you. I know you'll have to leave us a little early. Do you ever use the report when you're meeting with donors, or on the flip side, the nonprofit as it strategizes?
Absolutely, Ruth. I think that the Giving USA report is one of the most important reports in philanthropy. And I believe it is an educational tool to visit with both donors and decision makers, because most donors and decision makers do not understand where philanthropy comes from or more or less where it goes. They're thinking about themselves only or their own cause, and they don't think about the broader context of how philanthropy plays a huge role in our overall GDP. For instance, GDP, philanthropy or nonprofits are 10% of overall GDP. And that is huge. That's nearly $2 trillion to $3 trillion that philanthropy is working in our economy. Dr. Rooney might shave off some of those statistics and visit about that, but it was 10% of the overall economy a few years ago. So you can see why individual giving and corporate and foundation giving is very important. You can also see where government and federal funding is even more important, because philanthropy cannot do what government can do. So therefore, we really need government to do more, but philanthropy can be a partner in government. And as we talk to nonprofits across the Midwest and across the United States, what we find is that nonprofits that have public-private partnerships are very well received by funders. Funders from foundations, funders from corporations and individuals. They like to see the idea that government and philanthropy can come together to benefit their nonprofit. And that's a role that government can play. And that's why it's important that nonprofits work with our elected officials, or as I call them, hired officials. We hire them every 2, 4, or 6 years to do something for us. So don't be afraid to go and visit with them. And with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Rooney for being here, and Ruth for you sharing this message, an important message, not only in Greater Kansas City, but across the country and the world.
Thanks for joining us, Jeffrey.
Okay.
Dr. Rooney, okay, let's talk about some of these numbers. Let's dig in. You've already told us that we've got lots of corporate giving. Let's talk about where the dollars are going and any shifts there, and we'll let you be the soothsayer of what that means.
Sure. So, one of the things that happens is giving to religious organizations. So again, mass mosque, synagogue, congregation is the largest share of total giving to the different uses side of the equation. Giving to human services was dropped by over 2%. So, part of that was, I think, during the height of COVID, there was a lot of people reallocated their giving. So there was a lot more giving to health and human service types of organizations. And so we see a little bit of a regression to the mean. Giving to foundations grew pretty dramatically, over about 4.5% in inflation adjusted dollars. And this is a reflection of generally how well the stock market and corporate profitability and so on had gone on last year. And many people said, I'm going to make a permanent commitment to philanthropy by either creating a new family foundation or increasing the asset base of my existing family foundation. And so that's part of what was going on. One of the things, some people may say, well, why don't they give those dollars directly to charity? Well, one of the reasons for creating a foundation is so that you can allocate those gifts over many years, sometimes during the rest of your life, sometimes in perpetuity. And so there's different strategies about creating foundations or giving directly. So, that's a donor's choice, and we want to respect that. Giving to health went up almost 3%. And that was from relatively high, prior years because of all the money that was donated to COVID research and COVID-related relief. Giving to public society benefit went up 18% in inflation-adjusted dollars. But, that includes a variety of organizations like Jewish Federations, United Ways, but it also includes the national donor advised funds like Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, the large national donor advised funds, commercially operated DAFs, and in part as a response to, that had been growing very rapidly before former President Trump's tax bill, but with the new tax bill, the new tax law, basically hardly anyone, less than 10% of households are itemizers. And so what you see is some people bunching their giving through using a donor advised fund so that every second or third or fourth year, they make a large gift and then they become an itemizer for at least that year. Okay. So again, people don't give just because of taxes, but they do respond to the incentives the tax code presents. And so they can increase their tax benefit they may give the same amount over those 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but they bundle when they make it to their donor advised fund and then distribute it out over the next several years. So we see a strategy there.
I know there were two really big buckets. One, I think, was public sector.
Yeah, that's the public society benefit.
That, and I saw arts and humanities were what's with that? Great for the arts, but
so this is surprising in many ways. So, but I think one of the things that happens is giving to the arts got hurt. They get hurt. One of the worst in terms of downturn years, and during the COVID years, they did not do as well. And people reallocated their giving, and they said, that it's more important to help those in need. It's more important to fund COVID research. It's more important to help the hungry and the homeless and so on during a more desperate period. And it's not that giving to the arts went to zero, but it slows down. And now you see, with the stock market doing so well last year, people saying, I'm going to make up some of that giving to the arts, I think, in the past. So I think that was part of that. Similarly, giving to environment and animals, that went up 6.1% adjusted for inflation. And I think that is also a reflection of, affluence from the stock market and so on. And people saying, okay, that's more of a smaller niche area. But when people are doing very well, then that's an area that does well as well.
We have just a couple of minutes left. So what is your sense, your takeaway from the year 2001? And now that we're in 2022, I should have said 2021 from 2022. Sorry about that. We got lost in a few decades there. But what do we take away and where do we go?
So I think some key takeaways is although giving didn't grow as dramatically as we might prefer, it did grow. And in fact, total household giving set a record. So, it's the highest level it's ever been when we look at gifts by individuals. And gifts by corporations grew, but bequest giving, foundation giving, corporate giving, and total giving were all the second highest level, in the history of Giving USA. And so, and they were, the year before was the highest year. So we're seeing a period of great giving overall. It's just that when you measure in inflation, the inflation adjusted dollars makes it look not as great, right? But it is still, we see giving as a core American value in many ways, by individuals, by corporations, by foundations, and so on. But those foundations exist because of individuals. And charitable bequest giving exists because of individuals. And so, these are dollars that are coming out of different accounts, basically, from individuals, but they're mostly coming from individuals.
So we can be heartened that people still giving different ways, some surprises in there. 2022 could be interesting.
I think it will be interesting. And I think, obviously, we know from prior research that giving during recessions generally goes down. And we're all hoping for the proverbial soft landing, right? But that's hard to engineer, and historically rarely actually happens. And for the Federal Reserve Board, their primary job is to balance inflation versus job growth and unemployment. And so, but when inflation is as high as it is right now, they're going to be more focused on fighting inflation than they are on job growth. Unemployment's at historic lows, though, and so we've got, I think, some room to maneuver. But who would have guessed? I think President Putin in Russia, when he decided to invade Ukraine, I think he knew that would goose up natural gas and oil prices. But I don't think he anticipated both how strong the Ukrainians would be, the international reaction, and what ripple effects this would have on the rest of the world and the rest of the world's economy. But maybe he did. Maybe that was a very Machiavellian move on his part for other reasons besides just territorial acquisition.
Not surprising at all. Dr. Patrick Rooney, thank you so much. You should visit the website, www.givingusa.org. It has all kinds of information and ways to get the report. And we thank you for boiling it down for us.
Oh, thanks. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for watching KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications. This KC Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. To be a guest on KC Cares or underwriting opportunities, please visit our website, kccaresonline.org. And spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at KC Cares Radio and on Instagram at KC Cares Online. Catch us Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on ESPN 1510 a.m. and 94.5 FM. Thanks for listening to KC Cares.